This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. The movie The Red Pill. The Red Pill. A young, self-identified feminist filmmaker named Cassie J sets out to tackle what's called MRAs, men's rights activists, and the men's rights movement from a feminist perspective. But something happens along the way, and it's worth checking out because there are so many important issues that she raises, and she handles them beautifully and even-handedly, and lets, essentially people make their own case, and thus you make your own judgment about radical feminists like the executive editor of Miss Magazine, who she interviews on a number of these topics, and a couple of academics, and the gender studies academics types, or people like an academic himself, Warren Farrell, the author of The Myth of Male Power, and other books, who actually started out as a feminist himself at the infancy of that movement with Gloria Steinem in the 60s. When it comes to the justice system's treatment of men versus women, the parental rights of men versus women, the
instances of domestic violence of women against men,
the employment dynamics of men versus women. It's really, really a thoughtful exposition on all of these topics, and hopefully a lot of people see it, and it sparks a lot of debate.
But I love the fact, too, that she didn't insert herself so much, but the fact that she's a feminist and described herself as a feminist, and she spent a year with different men from the MRA movement, and I thought that she did a really nice job of documenting her growth as a human being and the metamorphosis that she went through.
Well,
after having conversations with different groups.
She asked good questions. She followed the logic and the evidence with respect to the answers she was given from different quarters to those questions. And I have to tell you, however you come to this, if you come to this like she did, Cassie J, as a feminist, you're going to hear responses from the likes of the Miss Magazine editor or academics that I think you're going to find wanting. She certainly did. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by an MRA, as they're called, men's rights activist from Evanston. His name is Dan Bulf. Dan, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Glad to be here.
So, at the outset of the film, and consistent with how the men's rights activism has been treated generally by the press, she starts with this being some kind of, women-hating, Al Bundy sort of group or movement that, just is playing victim to advance themselves the same way that they've seen other groups who truly have been victimized advance themselves, and it's not legitimate. Now, she evolves in terms of that caricature of the men's rights movement, but why don't you share your experience and what the group in Evanston does and what your perspective is?
Well, thanks. Yeah, I'm really pleased to come on and share my experience. I'm a supporter of the MRA because I do believe in the data around it, and my experience has been that those are the symptoms of a greater root issue. And for me, my experience has been that going through an initiation process, I know it sounds really weird, and it maybe blow your mind a little bit, going through a weekend-long initiation process with other men who have done their work, something that we call men's work, to find out who they are, to be authentic, honest, open, vulnerable, to be able to be what I consider to be more of a true man or a real man, versus a lot of the stereotypes that we see that continue in our culture, the Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator tough guy, or the John Wayne do-it-alone kind of man. Those don't work anymore. And I believe that that's the root cause of what's going on in the male culture. and where this destructiveness and self-sabotage continues to happen.
Well, Dan, let's take a step back, though. Tell us why you decided to join a men's rights group in the first place.
Well, so the reason I decided to join a men's rights group is because of my own personal journey. I was having a very difficult time in my family life. I have and had at the time a wonderful wife, 2 great kids, a wonderful suburban house and lifestyle, and I was just imploding. I even had a plan, it's a crazy plan in my head, because I was completely stressed out and had this plan that I was going to move into the local YMCA because I couldn't handle all the pressures of being a dad and being a provider and supporting my wife and who was I and was I of any value. So when I looked to a lot of the data that you shared about the men's rights movement, I realized that that's a lot of where my angst and my issues were coming from.
So it was not so much conflict with your wife. It was just kind of the overall pressure of your responsibilities and I guess society's expectation for how you're to handle those responsibilities.
That was a big part of it, and then also part of it was what I learned or didn't learn growing up. I like to say I had 4 fathers growing up. I had a birth father who abandoned me. I'm adopted. And then I had my adopted father, who was a violent man. And then I had a stepfather who was an alcoholic and ended up dying from alcoholism. And then I had a 4th father who was bipolar. And so, what did I learn from my fathers? Very little, except from the standpoint of how I didn't want to be. Mm-hmm. So from there, that's what caused a lot of this implosion. Who am I supposed to be? I had such high expectations of what I didn't want to be. How can I show up as who I want to be? So that's why I did some exploration, and through the fortunate reconnection with a friend from high school, introduced me to, hey, here's what's going on in our culture. Look at what's happening. Our roles are shifting. We are no longer the provider, the procreator, the protector. It's not exclusive anymore. So who are we as men anymore? And that's a big part of the men's rights movement is identifying is that we've lost our identity. And so I've looked to recreate or to redefine myself and my identity. And for me, that looks like being authentic, honest, and opening. And a word that really resonates for me in all this, in my journey here, is being nurturing. How do I nurture my children, my wife, my friends? And it's not a soft nurturing. It's how do I support them and in a tough way, but also in a very loving way.
So how do you react when the men's rights movement and you and your fellow travelers are characterized as part of some hate group or women haters and the like? Right.
I react. I'm kind of astounded, especially with such a broad generalization. The people who make these statements don't know me. They don't know my life, and I think that's what the journey of the producer of the Red Pill discovered. She walked in with a set of expectations, and I was really happy to see that she was open herself to hearing where these men were coming from. So I react, and what I always do is and this is something I've learned on my journey, ask questions. Mm-hmm. What makes you think that? How is it that you came to that decision? I even asked, so why does that make you so angry? Because 9 out of 10 times there's something in their lives that's triggering them. So just like I had something in my life that was triggering me to go to a very unhealthy place, for me, with all those accusations and their own anger is something being triggered from them. And how can we all come together and wrap our hearts and minds around that and deal with that and move forward together instead of separately?
And how often do you...
Like a little bit like our politics, right?
Yep, exactly. And how often do you guys have meetings? And can you fit in some room for Dan Proft if he wants to go to the men's rights
Sure.
group.
I'll have to do it on a night where I'm not attending my lonely guys group. But go ahead. So go ahead.
That's all right. We'll squeeze you in. So yeah, we meet once a week, and there are groups all over the world. I'm part of an organization called the Mankind Project. And the Mankind Project was started back in the 80s through the work of it was platformed from a work by Robert Bly, who wrote a book called Iron John. And tens of thousands of men across the world have gone through this experiential weekend and then continue on together in small groups. I've been going to groups for 15 years. We meet once a week in Evanston. And I now have 7 men that I can go to anytime I have any sort of issue, anything. And they accept me without judgment, and they do whatever they can to support me through that with wisdom and advice. So it's really been a life-changing event for me. So Dan, when you come, we meet on Wednesday nights. We had our meeting last night.
Did somebody bring food?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Okay. Sounds good. Well, Dan Bulf, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate you joining us and giving us your perspective on this, particularly with the popularity that this documentary is going to have.
You guys are great. Thank you very much for giving me the time to talk.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're